Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. Chatham County's COVID-19 daily case rate per 100,000 stayed almost the same from last week to this week, while the community transmission index is down from 248.5 to 208.1. This is the lowest transmission index we have seen since the beginning of July, but anything over 100 is still considered a high level of community spread. Our positive test percentage is 8.2%, which is the lowest it has been since July the 1st. Now, this is good news. We are grateful to the numerous residents and visitors who continue to follow our 3 W's: wearing a mask, watching your distance, and washing your hands. The United Way of the Coastal Empire continues to help Savannians with past-due mortgage, rent, and utility bills directly related to the COVID-19 pandemic, thanks to CARES Act funding from the city of Savannah. To date, the United Way has helped more than 1,500 people living in our city. 77 people have avoided eviction because of this assistance. They have distributed $1.2 million, including $200,000 to Second Harvest Food Bank to help people in Savannah get through the challenges they are facing because of the pandemic. I want to thank the United Way and partner organizations, to include the Economic Opportunity Authority, Family Promise of Greater Savannah, Wesley Community Centers, and Salvation Army for making this possible. The United Way is still accepting applications for this assistance. If you want more information, you can call 211 Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. or visit savannahga.gov/CARES Act, savannahga.gov/CARES Act to fill out the application online. As I'm sure you're aware, several monuments in Forsyth Park were vandalized again last weekend. This is the second time that it has been defaced in the past couple of months. Regardless of your feeling about the statues, the fact remains that this is city property, and vandalizing city property is against the law and therefore will be treated accordingly. Savannah police are investigating this situation. In the meantime, we'll have extra police patrolling the area, and we'll have other surveillance methods employed to keep an eye on things. We remind our citizens that this happened in plain sight, so if you see anything, we want you to say something. We want you to report it immediately. Kudos to the Savannah Police Department and Chief Mentor, who is here. A new behavioral health unit consisting of specially trained officers and medical staff that are now responding to police calls involving individuals in crisis or with substance abuse issues. The Savannah Police Department received the federal opioid grant in June 2019 and began researching similar successful units. And we decided to model our unit after the behavioral health unit of Portland, Oregon, which has been in operation since 2013. This Intercept program will be one of the first police-led behavioral health units in Georgia. The Savannah Police Department began certifying all officers in crisis intervention team training and currently have approximately 70% of our force with this certification. 4 SPD supervisors and 26 officers, including both a behavioral health unit officer, including officers and supervisors of Savannah area law enforcement agencies, are certified enhanced crisis intervention team officers, and they're giving them an advanced level of training. And so we're glad that we will have a mental health professional on board and available to address these issues. And I thank and congratulate Chief Mentor, Savannah Police, for seeing the need that many of our enforcement activities are not necessarily enforcement. Sometimes it is other issues. And so in seeing that, again, we are leading in this regard. This Saturday, the Advocates for Restorative Communities in Savannah, which we call ARCs, Georgia Southern University, Overcoming by Faith, Dismissed Charities, the Georgia Department of Corrections, Pastors Alliance, First African Baptist Church, Kingdom Life Community Fellowship, and the Bryan Educational Services will present their annual When the Debt is Paid conference. This conference is for justice involved or justice impacted individuals, meaning those with felony convictions, those who are on probation or parole, to help them navigate through the barriers often experienced by this population. We know that when people have paid their debt to society, when they return home, they often face additional barriers. They pay their debt, but some people will never let them forget the debt. And so we want to help create and want to partner with Dr. Maxine Bryant and the work she's been doing to make sure that we have ways and proven methods to be able to navigate through these very difficult times. We know that people are getting home from jails and prisons if they're justice involved. If they cannot find their way, we know what the unfortunate alternatives are, and we want to do all we can to help them in not being that person. If they want to change, Savannah, as being the beloved community that I know that we want to help them change. So this conference is free, and to register, you can call 912-344-3602, 912-344-3602. And again, I want to thank Dr. Maxine Bryant for her leadership and stewardship for our citizens who need and deserve a second chance. Almost finally, we need your help in shaping the future of our community and our country. And there are two ways to make your voice heard right now. First one is completing the 2020 census, and the second is to vote. We were elated to find out that a federal judge extended the deadline to complete the 2020 census to October 31st. And so census takers will continue to follow up on households that have not responded for an additional month. But we don't want you to wait until somebody has to call you or come to your house in order for you to fill out the census. Please go to my2020census.gov, my2020census.gov today, right now, or you can call 844-330-2020, 844-330-2020 to be counted. If you prefer to fill out the survey in Spanish, it's 844-486-2020, 844-486-2020. Be reminded your information is secure, and the Census Bureau cannot share with any other governmental agency or organization. Chatham County loses $2.3 million for our community every year for every 1,000 residents not counted in the census. You think about that. We lose $2.3 million a year for every 1,000 residents uncounted in the census, which is why we want to make sure we don't miss out, because if we can't get that money from DC, we have to pay that money locally. The last day to register to vote in the November election is Monday, October the 5th. Hence, the word of the day, vote, 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 vote. You can register online at registertovote.sos.ga.gov, register to vote, spelled out, .sos.ga.gov. You can check your registration status or polling place by calling the Chatham County Voter Registration Office at 912-790-1520, 912-790-1520, or online at mvp.sos.ga.gov. If you would like to request an absentee ballot, you could do that by going online to ballotrequest.sos.ga.gov. And new this year, you can sign up for updates on the status of your ballot. The state launched a new ballot tracking website on Friday that allows voters to sign up for alerts to follow when their absentee ballot is issued, received, and accepted. So you can go to Georgia.ballottracks, BALLOTTRAX.net/voter, enter your information, and sign up for notifications. The City Council and I recognize that the importance of voting and making sure that every Savannah citizen has the opportunity and the access to make sure their vote is counted, which is why last week, as you are aware, the City Council approved an intergovernmental agreement with the Chatham County Board of Registrars to erect secure election drop boxes at 4 locations in the city of Savannah. So in the city of Savannah, you can drop off your ballots at the Savannah Civic Center, the Carver Village Community Center, the WW Law Community Center, and the Liberty City Community Center. We encourage you to vote early and to get it done. Yesterday, the City Council met to determine our next steps regarding the finalists for Savannah's next city manager. As a reminder, the finalists are Kalua Barnes, Deputy City Manager of Modesto, California, Odie Donald II, City Manager of South Fulton, Georgia, and John Pombier, Assistant City Manager of Mesa, Arizona. As you're aware also, the City Council met in executive session to discuss the finalists. At this point, the Council could not reach a consensus on a singular candidate. So it appears that we are at an impasse. We just could not get a consensus on one candidate. As I stated on numerous occasions, for the benefit of our community and for the successful candidate, I've sought a unanimous 9-0 vote at best, an 8-1 or 7-2 vote at worst. Unfortunately, we are nowhere near that. And personally, I think this position is far too important, far too critical to our community and our bureaucracy for us to sacrifice expediency for comfort. We must get this right. We have to get this right. And so we will discuss our options and next steps in the coming days, and of course, I'll keep you informed. Almost 3 months ago, I introduced Savannah Cares, Citizens Accountability and Review of Emergency Services, a distinguished panel appointed by City Council. I tasked Savannah Cares with reviewing the current use of force policies and internal affairs data in the Savannah Police Department, conducting meetings to review comments from the public regarding the use of force and professionalism of our department, and ultimately compiling and releasing a report of their findings. This task was bigger than any of us expected, and there was a lot of information to be reviewed, and I think we all clearly understood that this work could not be completed within the 90 to 100-day period that I initially suggested. I asked the task force to prepare an interim report of their work to date, and then asked them to continue their Herculean efforts. I could tell you that here we are, probably day 92 or so, and this committee has been meeting regularly in spite of all of them being very busy people, and I want them to know how much I appreciate them engaging in this very difficult work. As you all are also familiar, there was a use of force incident that the Savannah Cares Task Force had the opportunity to review and then offered to the chief a recommendation, which, as you know, has led to an indictment of one Savannah police officer. So I'm pleased to invite Attorney Diane Morrell McLeod, chair of the task force, to share their interim report, which has already been shared with Chief Minter City Manager Monahan, and the City Council. Chief Mentor will review the recommendations and will issue the response at a later date. And it will probably be best for the purposes of social distancing if the chair come up and you all can come down and just spread across the front. I'm going to clean this desk off and I'm going to put my mask back on. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning. My name is Diane McLeod. I'm serving currently as the chair of the Savannah Cares Task Force. Here today, we have other members of the task force. We have Attorney Jay Blackburn. We have Mr. Eugene Priester. We have Attorney Michael Edwards. And we have Mr. Dave McDonald. As the mayor indicated to you, this task force was formed on July the 7th, at which time the mayor appointed several members of the community to be on this task force to look at use of force, internal affair reports, as well as have community engagement. The committee also consists of Dawn Baker, Willie Brooks, Reverend Katie Calloway, Kenneth Glover, Michael Johnson, Dr. Lorenda King, Corporal Sharif Lockett, Anthony Maven, Pastor Ricardo Manuel, Dr. Marie Miller, Pam Miller, David Miner, Jim Maricus, Natalia Sanders, and Attorney Alda Quilkin. After meeting for the past several months, looking at IA reports, speaking with officers as well who are currently employed, including the chief with the police department, we've come up with some interim recommendations for the police department. One of the things we looked at as it relates to the interim recommendations are things that can be implemented immediately and at very little or no cost to the department. So we also looked at if these recommendations would impact the budget. We do anticipate making some long-term recommendations that will probably have budgetary implications, but those are not the recommendations we are making today. Along those lines, one of the first things that came to mind as the committee met and we thought about recommendations that the department should make has to do with professionalism of the officers, as well as the use of profanity. The department has a general order as it relates, but we believe that it should, we believe that the language should indicate that the order should be written to more directly as it relates to the use of profanity, as well as dehumanizing and discriminatory language. Right now, the order says no employee will engage in grossly indecent or vulgar talk, which would detract from the efficient operation of the department. We believe it could be assumed that the use of grossly indecent or vulgar talk is acceptable if it did not affect the operation of the police department. Instead, we believe the use of profanity should be specifically prohibited at all times by members of the department, whether speaking with officers or members of the community. Upon reviewing additional documents, we also looked at de-escalation training. One of the things that came up during our meetings was officers being able to manage situations and being able to de-escalate situations which come before them. It is our understanding that right now, POST, which is the accrediting agency for the police officers, requires mandatory de-escalation training once a year. It is also our understanding that the department offers de-escalation training to officers throughout the year, but it is not mandated. The recommendation to the department is that the escalation training should be mandated to all officers for all of them to complete at least 2 to 3 times per year, and that would be in addition to the post training and the post certified de-escalation training they receive. We also talked about crisis intervention training. We believe that the department should endeavor to train a minimum of 20% of its members in crisis intervention yearly until every member has been trained. We believe that once all members have been trained in crisis intervention, then of course that should be an annual recertification. It was very good to hear this morning with the new unit that's being implemented that the officers are getting the training, but it is our recommendation that 100% of the department receives crisis intervention training. One of the documents we looked at was the policy as it relates to use of force. There is a use of force board that has been established within the department, and that board should be comprised of 2 community members. At this time, those community members are not on that board. Use of force complaints are being reviewed by members of the police department only. It is our recommendation that those citizens are added on that board immediately. As it relates to use of force, one of the operation policies indicates that an officer can review body-worn camera video to enhance the officer's ability to document and review statements and actions for both internal reporting requirements and for courtroom preparation and presentation. As it relates to a use of force investigation, the committee believes that officers should not be allowed to review video until after they complete their initial formal statement to investigators. Right now, the officers are able to review that body cam footage prior to giving that formal statement to investigators. We believe that that should be prohibited immediately. We believe that they should only be allowed to review their body cam footage after they submit their formal interview. As it relates to calls for service, we spoke with officers who met with us. We talked about the normal shifts that they have so many calls that they really can't adequately engage with the community. One of the things that we believe affects the perception of an officer in the community is the officer's ability to really get out of his car, walk his beat, and meet with the community. In talking with officers, they really only have time to go from one call to the next, giving the community very little to no attention. There appears not to be available time for an officer to engage in a meaningful manner. We believe one method to alleviate this large amount of calls for service is to explore and possibly implement alternative means of handling calls for service. That could mean having telephone reporting units handling some Part 2 crimes, and those would be the non-critical incidents. We know that during the pandemic that actually occurred when we were in lockdown. That would be the theft from vehicles, destruction of property, stolen bikes, and things of that nature. If we believe that if we offload these non-critical calls to and use alternative means for them, it would provide more time for officers to get out and actually engage and know the community that they serve. We ask that the department explore the potential of implementing alternative means of handling calls for service. One of the other things that we learned during the course of our meetings and investigations is that there are officers who actually make contact with complainants when they are prior to arriving on a call. We believe the department should explore the potential of having all officers call the complainant prior to arrival on the scene of a call for service to get a better understanding of the circumstances on the scene. The committee understands that this may not be practical in every situation. However, we believe that if an officer is hesitant to provide his cell phone number, and his number would be revealed if he called, we learned that there's an app that some officers use to call the complainant. We believe that if they are able to make contact with the complainant, it allows them to assess the situation prior to getting there. It allows them to determine whether or not there are additional officers needed, if it is a potential hostile situation. So we do believe that if they are able to implement a situation in which officers are required, when possible, and safely to do so, to make contact with the complainant prior to arriving on scene to assess the situation. As the mayor indicated, he also requested that we look at internal affairs investigations. One of the things that we found that was very troubling to us upon reviewing those investigations is that there were investigations that were still open that were over a year old. It is our recommendation that those internal affairs investigations are completed within the next 60 days, and that going forward, that should be an aspiration to the department to complete those internal affairs investigations within the 60-day time period. We do recognize that in January, the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, which was signed by the governor back in June, will go into effect, and it gives the department 120 days to complete those interviews, but we believe the aspiration of the department should be at least 60 days, with the department keeping the complainant aware of the stages of the investigation. We believe that this will not only enhance public trust with the community, but it will also help the officers, because it's really not fair to them to have these investigations lingering and open as well. Upon reviewing for additional policies from the police department, one of the things that we found was that officers are allowed to fire a warning shot. We believe that that is not a good idea. We believe that the department should prohibit the use of warning shots completely. To expect an officer to fire a warning shot in a means that is not dangerous to the community at large, we believe is totally unreasonable. We believe that the fired bullet has to land somewhere, either into some place or someone. We believe the intention of this order is to eliminate the possible use of deadly force by frightening the suspect into surrendering. However, the damage to innocent people and property, we believe, outweighs the benefit. We believe that it is the committee's recommendation that the warning shots be prohibited under all circumstances. One of the other things that we also learned during the course of our investigation is that our community has very little information on how the department actually runs. We believe that the department should increase its public education to the community by either developing public service announcements or other educational means to have the community better understand the use of force policies as well as the standards. A lot of times we hear a lot of chatter on social media and within the community about what is use of force, how it's applied, because people don't know and they don't understand, and we believe that the department should make a better effort to educate the public on what use of force is and how it should be applied. We also believe that the education piece would enhance police-community relationships and allow the community to have a better expectation as it relates to the use of force. The other recommendation that we had was the battle dress uniforms, which most of us strongly disagree with. In the battle dress, we mean the military style fatigues that officers wear. It is the recommendation of the committee that Savannah Police Department should prohibit the use of military style fatigues by all members with the exception of SWAT operations and special operations members. Warrant squad and patrol officers should always be clothed in typical police uniforms. The widespread use of military style fatigues gives the community members the impression that an occupying army is patrolling our city. These uniforms are not conducive, we believe, to good police-community relationships. And our last recommendation relates to chokeholds. While the department does have a policy as it relates to the use of chokeholds and it prohibits them, we believe that a policy should be put in place which explicitly prohibits the use of any holds or restraints that restricts the air and blood flow of a person. These prohibitions will include chokeholds, knees applied to the back of a person's neck while prone, and the forcing of a person's head into the ground as a control technique. Any use of any type of holds or restraints which prohibit the free flow of air and blood should be prohibited, and we believe that that should be an express policy. Those are the 12 recommendations that we would submit to the mayor, the city manager, and the department at this time. Our next steps is that we will be scheduling community meetings to engage the community to find out how they would like to see their department, what are their expectations of the department. We expect these meetings to be both virtual as well as in person, and we will notify the media through the mayor's office when those are scheduled. Thank you.
While we do this, is there any questions for Ms. McLeod? Let her take them since she's here, and then I'll come and take whatever questions y'all have for me. Now, I'll say all that to say the chief, as I said, chief, city manager, and city council has received these already. We do not expect for them to have a response now, but they are reviewing. Any questions for Mr. McLeod, any members of the committee? Okay.
I have one. So can you talk a little bit about the discussions and kind of what this was like for you guys in that roundtable setting and why these were the priorities you guys came out with?
Well, again, as we looked at priorities, we did consider budgetary constraints. So we wanted to be able to put in and make recommendations that could be implemented immediately, changes that could be implemented immediately that would not affect the budget of the department. So making changes as it relates to putting the explicit policy about the use of force with the neck holds and with the choke holds. That's something that can be implemented immediately, that can go out department-wide, which would not affect their budget. The professionalism piece, that's something that can be implemented immediately, that's not going to affect their budget. Even the alternative means, we know that the department used alternative means of reporting Part 2 crimes when we were on lockdown. And so that is something that they can look at, and if it means reallocating resources, then of course that's something we would ask them to do in order for these officers to have additional time to spend with the community.
So with 12 different recommendations, I mean, a lot of these are what policing was based off of, throughout history. So for you, were you surprised at what you found throughout your discussions and your investigations?
We were not surprised because we all knew, every member on that task force, we knew and we understood that policing has to be reimagined. We also know and we understood as a group that policing as it currently exists was not working because of the relationships in the community. And so we wanted to come up with ideas that not only would improve the department, but also improve the relationships with the community.
And one more question. Is it your hope that once this goes forward and is implemented, that other places around will follow?
It is our hope, and it is also our hope that once our long-term recommendations are put in place, that the community will see a police department that they want. Because of course you want the safety piece, but you also want a community to have a department that is going to police in a manner that they are going to respond to.
Two more from me. These recommendations, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said interim. Are these things that are going to be enacted right away, permanently? How does that work?
So these are recommendations that comes from our task force. We have submitted them to the mayor, the city manager, and the police chief. It is their decision as to whether or not they're going to implement these recommendations, but these are our recommendations at this time.
And for you guys in these discussions, how much did the current culture play into what you guys are doing, what we're seeing kind of across the country coming into Savannah here specifically?
Well, it plays somewhat of a role, but also, a lot of the information we had a very diverse group. So it wasn't just the current culture. We had people, we had law enforcement, we have attorneys, we have community members, we have people who have been involved with the justice system. So we have a variety of representation on the community to bring various views and comments and thoughts, so that when we make these recommendations, it's just not coming from an attorney attorney who is seeing something. It's coming from the community. It's coming from someone who has worked on a task force in another city at a previous date, so that we can understand what we can do and how we can reimagine our local department so that it can work better.
Good morning. My question for you is, I know that these recommendations are things that can be implemented right away. They don't cost money. Would you be able to elaborate on some of the other recommendations that you all have thought of that would affect the budget?
So the long-term recommendations, we don't have those set in stone yet, and we don't have a consensus of the group, so I would not go into those at this time.
And my other thing, quickly, is do you know how many recommendations in total you might have? I know this is 12, but maybe the target of what you all are looking for?
No, because we actually thought we were only going to have about 5 or 6, and we ended up with 12. So.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, and what do you want the community to hear from your recommendations today?
So what we want the community to hear is that the committee is listening to them. We will be in the community next month. So if they have any complaints, any concerns, once we publish those dates, please come and let us know what your experiences are, because we think that is very important in formulating long-term recommendations to the city. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe that the takeaway is that we have a very well-run, very well-respected police department. We want to keep it that way. When you look at what's happening across the country, and certainly in the conversations I've had with mayors around the country, they are facing situations where public unrest has occurred primarily because of the lack of confidence expressed with the police department. Savannah is not the same. We have dedicated men and women who dedicate their lives to this every day, and they get it right most of the time. You have leadership that is engaged, that wants to be a part of the solution, which is why the end of May, when we had the marches out there, Chief Mentor and his command staff were out in front. Just because something works doesn't mean that we can't make it better. And so I think this was a wonderful opportunity for us to hear from our citizens. And so these are 12 recommendations that I think provide opportunity for discussion, because sometimes we may not see ourselves in the same way others see us. And so providing this method, this means for us to have this discussion as the committee continues its work, I think is the launching pad for us to continue to do bigger and greater things. As evidenced earlier, some of the things that we talk about in terms of reimagining policing are things that Chief Mentor and those are already proactively engaged in. So I think in the end we become better by this process, and I thank Attorney McLeod and members of the task force for their hard work and for working to make Savannah a better and safer place for anyone, for everyone. Like I said in May, work like this is how you turn a moment into a movement. And this is where the movement works. And I'm grateful to these professionals, these public servants that are here today that are willing to help shape Savannah's future. So that ends all of our prepared remarks, and so I guess the rest of the questions are for me. I assume you have no questions for me, and so I'll just say good night and thank y'all for coming out.
I wish
No.
that was the case.
Okay, all right.
This is the first set of recommendations we've seen out of this committee that's really this major. When you first got to take a look at them, what were your responses? Were you surprised by anything that they recommended?
Well, I had opportunities to come in and out, just kind of look at their work periodically. And, you know, some things I've heard before, I think that, you know, what I did get was that, you know, people were really impressed with our police department. I think when the chief and those made presentations to the committee, explaining their use of force policy, I think it was a great educational process. I think, you know, where we have not done as good of a job, and Chief and I have talked about it, and obviously we have to work and do it, is that we have to educate people. We have to educate people on what they do, how they do it, and we'll have some ways to be able to better educate people about, you know, what their rights are, the considerations of a police department, particularly when they're engaging in contact, the issues as it relates to disproportionate minority contact that have played out across the country. Again, for us, we want to be proactive. We want to be ahead of the curve. We want to continue to lead. So I was impressed by the recommendations because I know they did not come easy. I know that there were, I thought it might have been, you know, 3 or 4 interim, and, you know, again, I understood it was kind of battle royal, just trying to, you know, get back and forth, debating it back and forth, and then you had the collective mind of just all of these great folks that have all of this experience from not only law enforcement, justice impacted, justice involved, people in the clergy, you know, people in the media. So I just think it was just a good mix of people. And so I'm very proud of this task force, and I'm very proud of the work that they have done thus far. They've given us work to do as they continue their work. And then I'm starting to think about what else I can find for them to do once they get finished this work. I got to keep this band together for a while.
And is there anything in the recommendations that you didn't see come out of this interim group that you want to see moving forward? Anything that wasn't touched on that you heard in the community needs to be done?
No, not particularly. You know, I think that one thing that stuck out with me, and you know, in my time as a police officer, you know, I think deals with profanity. I was taught that, you know, the reason why you're a professional is because you have the ability to work above. And so, you know, here I am, the mayor of the city. People cuss me out all the time. I can't cuss them back. Well, I guess I could. But the problem is I would be looked at differently because people would think that I should know better. And you know what? And I'm held to a higher standard. And I mean, I get that. People have cussed Chief Mentor. I've heard it at least once or twice. He didn't cuss them back because I think he recognized as an executive, as a leader, that he can't necessarily treat people the same way that they treat him, that people are due respect even if they don't give it. And so I've always been concerned that as professionals, that we should not have a police officer just throwing the profanity out there. I think the moment you've done that, in my mind, you have now created a situation where you've taken the police officer from a higher standard, and now you're back in the mud again, and they get cussed out all of the time. But you recognize that that's what happens, and there's just nothing wrong with still offering that respect, because the problem is once the other officer gets into the cussing and then the disrespect, it just escalates from there. And so I'm hoping that's something that I think the chief can kind of take to heart, because the fact is that, you know, in the end, we are public servants. We signed up for this. And so you just don't see someone treating their customers with disrespect. I mean, I just think that we have to hold ourselves up to a higher standard. So that's something that I'm hoping that certainly is easy. And, you know, and the other thing is this, and I hate to say it, but I've seen situations where the same officer will cuss at some folk, but won't cuss at other folk. Because, you know, depending on the person, might have on a suit, the person might speak better English, they might be more fluent, they might be more politically connected. And so, you know, I'm just saying that we maybe need to establish a standard for everybody. You know, whether they have a PhD or have no D at all, whether they live in the White House or the outhouse, that we should still have the same level of respect for everybody. And respect is the basis from which everything else takes place.
Do we think those recommendations, even though they're can be implemented immediately?
Well, I mean, that's up to the chief and the city manager, recognizing these are recommendations. And so I want them to discuss it. I want them to talk about it with their command staff. I do expect a report in the near future about where they are. Hopefully, and maybe some conversations between the chief and the task force, maybe to get more information. But you know, we can't ask the community for input and then not, you know, blow it off the input. So I don't think the chief is inclined to do that, and neither am I. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning, ma'am.
Huge shift in content, but I just want to talk to you a little bit about the globe on the end. It sounds like they're wanting to build a Parker's building there, and a lot of, you know, those born and raised in Savannah are concerned with what will happen with kind of that historic monument. I guess there's a petition out. Just curious, they sound like they might donate it to the city. Any plans to where that might be moved or what might happen?
I just heard about that myself. I have no thoughts, no ideas. I don't know what we would do with a globe. I mean, put it up on top of City Hall, I don't know. Middle of Forsyth Park. As I understand it right now, you know, there's no agreement that exists. And so, you know, I mean, we'll accept the globe, we'll accept some money too. If you want a gift or something, but, you know, as long as I can remember being in Savannah, that globe is kind of iconic. And so, as it goes further, we'll see where it goes. Right now, as I understand it, Mr. Manager, there's nothing out there about, you know, everything right now is just talk. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So my question is about the city manager search. So in the case, which we talked about, you know, last week, that you have to start from scratch. Will the current city manager, Pat Monahan, will he stay as long as you need, depending on how long this process is?
Well, we're still talking. I'm hoping that he will at least get us through. We're now in our budget season, so we can discuss that. I do have some ideas for an interim situation. Pat Monahan has served us phenomenally well, above and beyond the call of duty, and he's just been absolutely phenomenal. I wish, again, that he would stay, but I also recognize that he gave us 3 months into this term, and now it's in almost the 10th month and he's still here. He is retired. He wants to be retired. He wants to spend time with his wife and family. He wants to make cabinets and do all the other things that he does that makes him happy, and we want him to be able to do that. We do not want to take advantage of his kindness, so we have to balance that also with the needs of the organization. So we're talking. More importantly, I'm talking to his city manager, Mrs. Monahan, and perhaps we could work out something. But again, we're still talking. We'll reveal that once we kind of know where we go from here.
And that just segues me back into what we were talking about before, which if there's anything we've learned from the past 6 months is consensus is hard. So when it comes to these 12 recommendations, you know, if we're looking forward and for whatever reason, you know, Chief Manager, he's going to be the one who signs up on this ultimately. So if he doesn't agree with these recommendations, what's the path forward, you know, in accordance with the task force?
Well, ultimately, the chief works for the city manager that reports to council. I think that the chief will give them due regard, and he will evaluate them, and you know, if there's a reason why he does not feel that he cannot implement them, either be it for reasons of legality or practicality, that he'll be able to communicate that clearly to the manager, to myself, to the council, to the committee, so that we understand very clearly why we can or why we can't now. You know, again, Chief is a well-prepared public servant in the police service. And so again, I think, that's kind of where our progress is made from the discussion between the recommendations and the implementation of policy. It should be noted the chief has already done some changes in regards to the city's 8 Can't Wait program. So, he's already, in the midst of this, have already been making changes. So I think it's a positive step forward. I don't even think that the recommendations are an indictment of the police department. I mean, I think that, you're looking at it from a citizen's perspective of saying, and if these folks are saying that maybe there's something to that. I mean, there's no reason that we should have internal affairs investigations open for an extended period of time. I mean, unless it's still actively investigated or something's still out there, So I think we're trying to create ways that our police department continues to serve at a very high level. And again, I've said before, I'm very proud of the Savannah Police Department. The reason why we don't have some of the issues other cities face is because of the ability of the Savannah Police Department to actively engage the community. And this is just another level of that. We want to stay ahead of the curve. We're great, but we can get better.
Back to city manager search, can you talk a little bit about what those votes actually look like? And I mean, technically, could a majority vote bring someone into this position?
Well, I will tell you that the substance of what is discussed in a executive session is privileged by law. Votes are not taken in executive session except under very clear circumstances. For me, there were 3 or 4 questions. The first one is our next city manager within this group? Yes or no? Secondly, if it is, who is that individual? And then from there, where do we move forward? And essentially, you don't want a 5-4 vote. You just don't want it. Very few city manager candidates will tell you that they will pick up their city, pick up their lives, pick up their family, and move to a new city and a job where almost 50% of the individuals, of your bosses, don't want you there. I mean, that says a lot. And so I remember very clearly, maybe 2016 or so, when Rob Hernandez was elected to come to Savannah. Everybody did not agree that he was their first choice. However, at the time, it might have been a 7-2 or a 6-3, but for the good of the city, the folks decided to move there because the goal was to move forward with a 6-3. In this case, it's very, very similar. You have 9 individuals with very clear views about what they want to see in the city manager. And of the 9 individuals, every single one of them has a 1 vote. And you want the confidence of your city to have somebody to come here. And so if we don't have the confidence of the 9 individuals that are occupying these seats, that shows a divided council, it shows a divided community. And so again, this decision is too important to risk a simple majority vote. By the way, we don't, and I can disclose, we didn't have even a majority vote on 1 candidate. In that case, it's just best for us to declare it for what it is, which is an impasse, and for us to be able to reload maybe at the beginning of the year and start again. I do know from my professional experience, it's never good to recruit during the holidays. It just doesn't make sense. And so I want us to ultimately find a candidate that we all can agree with.
My last question for you is just that timeline, which I think you just answered. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, again, we're still in the discussion phases of that. I do believe we could get a 9-0 for Pat Monahan to be city manager. 8-1? Okay, we might be able to get 8190 for them. You know, again, and it just shows you really how important that position is. I mean, you know, we want to make sure we do it right. We know what happens when we don't do it right. We need someone who's going to come here, that's going to learn Savannah, that's going to love Savannah, and is going to invest some time in Savannah. You know, we know what happens when people come and stay a year or two, and I do not want to go through this process again in 18 months or 2 years. It's not good for the organization. You know, the organization is too fragile now from people being around. I mean, Mr. Monahan's been around almost as long as some of our interims. I mean, some of our permanent city managers. So I want our next one to be a keeper.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, ma'am.
My question for you is, after, I know you can't get into details about the executive session, but after the conversation with council talking about the city manager candidates, do you have concerns about the council ever agreeing on anybody?
Next question.
Okay.
I don't know. We're 9 special people. We are 9 people with very strong personalities. And I guess that's the way it should be. We see Savannah differently based on our experiences, based on where we come from, based on our constituencies. And I will tell you that, and I've heard it the whole spectrum. We included 85 individuals from our community that all had an opportunity to hear from the candidates, and they weighed in. You know, I have to keep trying. I have to keep trying, and I'm going to keep trying because I recognize how important this position is. You know, it's like being engaged, determining who you're going to marry. I mean, you know, all engagements don't turn into marriages because you want to make sure that when you do it, it's not necessarily for us to death do you part, but until the organization is stable, and you know, industry-wide, it can be anywhere from 3 to 5 to 7 years. We don't really have the long tenures as people like Michael Brown has had, or even Pat Monahan when he was at the county, Russ Abel before him. You don't see those types of things anymore. But we do want somebody who's going to come in and they're going to grow some roots here, and they're going to invest some time, roll up their sleeves, and help us to address the issues that our city faces. Also, someone who's going to come here and respect our wonderful employee pool and employee base that we have here, the professionals that dedicate their life to city service, and be able to find their strengths and work to bring the best out of them. So I'm disappointed. Obviously, we expended a great deal of time in this process, but again, I want us to keep doing it until we get it right. And I'm confident that we will get it right.
And after seeing the survey results from the community and what they thought, do you have any reaction to that? Were you surprised by any of the survey results? What are your thoughts on that?
I took them for what they were, that 85 individuals from city employees throughout the organization to community and neighborhood presidents that were selected by city council members, from business leaders that were selected by city council, by media, and all had the opportunity to be able to evaluate them. And we asked them for their feedback. And so the feedback came to me, and I sent it to council for them to use that in their deliberation process as a recommendation. I didn't expect it to be binding, but I thought it should at least provide a pretty good idea of where the community folks were. And so they had it, they've evaluated it, and again, the result is we could not reach consensus on a singular candidate.
And my last question for you, totally different topic, we're going to go away from city manager stuff. For COVID testing, the demand is way down at the Civic Center. I mean, it's amazing to drive by now. I think a few months ago, the parking lot was so full, and now, I mean, the past couple of days, we've driven by, there's nobody. So does that concern you at all, that maybe people are starting to think they don't need to get tested, they're kind of not as worried about it? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's both. I think people are COVID wary. I think that testing, the results have turned around quicker. Our numbers, I think we had 1,000 new cases within the last month or so. People are still dying from it. So we don't want people to lose sight that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And my concern is that, you know, October is here. We are entering flu season. In addition, we are now in the midst of when Savannah typically experiences our hurricane patterns. We usually between September, October, if you look, I think before it was like October 7th up in there when we started having those issues. And, you know, now the weather changes and people start being in the house more. I looked the other day at some of the regional football coverage, not here in Chatham County, but regionally. I was very concerned. I mean, I'm looking and it's like these kids are together and nobody has masks on, and I'm like, you know, we're in a pandemic. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about that we take this lightly and then we start bumping up again. I will tell you, there are times when I was pleased. This weekend was the Savannah Safe Jazz Festival. I was so impressed. I went there to give greetings, and when I arrived at the Ships of the Sea Museum, there was less than 50 people in that venue at any given time. Less than 50 people. Private venue, the city does not issue permits for private venues. Less than 50 people. However, they've seen their biggest viewership ever from a digital platform. So they found a way to be able to do this and still be able to manage it. In the Philharmonic yesterday, I was there, and you know that came up about how the Philharmonic is going to do Picnic in the Park and do it in a digital way. We're not going to have 10,000 people in the park. We're going to have thousands of people watching it digitally, and I think we're going to do better because of that. Again, Savannah is strong because Savannah knows how to adapt, and we are adapting. We cannot let our foot off the gas. We have to continue doing the things that have gotten us there, washing our hands, wearing our mask, and watching our distance. Thank you. Anything else? Well, I know it took a little bit longer today, but I was very excited to have the CARES task force recommendations. We promised between 90 and 100 days, so I wanted to make sure we got that done. And so I thank again the community members for coming out. I appreciate the continued support and continued work on behalf of our city. So as I always say, may God bless you. May God continue to bless the city of Savannah. Thank you.